last week, when we were talking about the documents produced by the Council, we said that the 4 pillars were the constitutions. So they're the 4 documents we're looking at. And the second one was the one we're doing tonight. And from those constitutions were produced decrees. So the fundamental statements of the bishops were in the constitutions, and then they produced decrees to fill out. So the ones in red are the ones that are filling out something in Lumen Gentium. So if you go on lay people, mission, ministry and life of priests, over Joan. Oh, and all the ones, there's only one that isn't. So you see how central is this document. The one on the church produced about 8 or 9 decrees after that. So this is a key one. Because as we saw last week, Pope Paul VI, summing it up at the end of the council, said really it was about the church. He went on to say then it was really also about the human being. But the material they looked at above all was the church itself. We take it for granted, but it's actually an area of study. What is the church and how does it work? And the Second Vatican Council focused on the church. And remember, there were those sessions. It was by the end of the second session that this document was finished. So we move on. What about a prehistory? What kind of things preceded this constitution that made it easy or hard for the bishops to come up with the things they came up with? First of all, you've got the Counter-Reformation. So you've got an understanding of the church born out of a reaction to Protestantism, to the Luther and Calvin movements. So the church understood itself in a certain way in opposition. Then the First Vatican Council, 1870, shaped the mind of the bishops as they entered into the Second Vatican Council. And it's possible to talk of the Second Vatican Council as a reception of the First Vatican Council, meaning we've been teaching the First Vatican Council right up until that time, nearly a century, but in the Second Vatican Council they put it in a new context. The teaching of the First Vatican Council, they put it in a new context, and when you put it in a new context it looks a bit different. So they received it in a new way. So the Counter-Reformations, and Robert Bellarmine described the church as an assembly of persons united by profession of the same faith, communion in the same sacraments, and under the government of legitimate pastors, and especially of the Pope. So he had an institutional description of the church, something that you could look at, and he actually said in his writings, you can look at the church the same way you can look at the state of Venice, a modern state, and describe what makes it, its boundaries and the way it's governed and so on. You can look at the church in exactly the same way. In other words, with an institutional mindset. And that kind of definition tended to dominate our way of speaking about the church. The First Vatican Council, in the document Pastor Aeternus, eternal pastor or shepherd, affirmed papal primacy, the primacy of the Pope, the primacy of the Pope in teaching and government. So both as a teacher and in a juridical way, in the government of the church. It taught papal infallibility in teaching, and it emphasized the hierarchical structure of the church, the way the church is structured hierarchically. So, Pastor Aeternus said about the Pope, as far as governance is concerned, that the Pope has ordinary and immediate jurisdiction, both over all and each of the churches, so over Townsville, and over all and each of the pastors, so over me, and the faithful, so over Stephen. And if you denied that, let you be anathema. So what does that mean? Ordinary power means it belongs simply to him because he's Pope. So we talk of extraordinary ministers of the Eucharist. That's a canonical term. Ordinary minister of the Eucharist is the priest celebrating the Mass. Extraordinary is when there are too many, lay people come up. So they're not an ordinary minister. It doesn't flow from them simply being baptised. They're invited into something. So ordinary ministry of the Pope and immediate. No one in between. It's direct. Pope Benedict has direct governance over me, over you, and over Townsville. That's what that says. Very clear. And on infallibility, in the exercise of his office as shepherd and teacher of all Christians, in virtue of his supreme apostolic authority, he defines a doctrine concerning faith or morals to be held by the whole church. That's when he teaches ex cathedra. That's infallible. Now, there are a whole lot of qualifications in there, faith and morals. So if he gets up and says the Cowboys are going to win their next game, he could be as right or wrong as I am. But faith and morals. And when he's officially as head, shepherd and teacher of all Christians, in virtue of his... There's a whole lot of conditions. So this prerogative has only been exercised twice in history. But it is a prerogative of the Pope. Infallibility, but he has the infallibility which the Church has. He expresses the infallibility of the Church. Because Jesus told us that the Holy Spirit would guide the Church. So the Church will not lose the faith. And the Church's faith is infallible. And the Pope can express it. And they have this, but also the things that they teach, their definitions. Mary was assumed into heaven. Mary was born immaculate, free from original sin. The two definitions, infallibly by a Pope. Those have authority of themselves and not because of the consent of the Church. So it doesn't depend on us all saying, yeah, I think you got it right, for it to be infallible. It's infallible because he said it, not because we agree. That's the teaching of Pastor Aeternus. That's what was very much in the bishop's minds all through last century. All right? When they got to the Second Vatican Council, a whole lot of other influences had started to occur, and therefore they put all of this in a new context. One of the things was, in their study of Pastor Aeternus, they discovered that it said something else which people tended to ignore. That the power of the Supreme Pontiff by no means detracts from the ordinary and immediate power of episcopal jurisdiction. So I have ordinary power and immediate here. I have the same kind of power in Townsville. Ordinary, it belongs because I'm ordained bishop. And it's immediate. No one doesn't pass through in any way. And his power should not detract from mine. So whatever he does as Pope is meant to help me do what I do, not detract from. So the people who imagine that I get a letter every day telling me what to do have misunderstood completely. I have the power in Townsville, all right? And his power is meant to help me, not detract. And I've never been told what to do. All right, move on. Other factors, these are just little funny little bits of history. Gallicanism, French Revolution, Gallic, French, Gallicanism. That the Pope was subject to govern secular governments. That the Church was subject to secular governments and was not free from that power, that it wasn't autonomous. It had to, even in Church matters, obey secular governments. And the Pope had to do what the bishops agreed to. That was Gallicanism. Joseph was the emperor, the Austro-Hungarian emperor, and he taught the same thing. These were two heresies condemned. But they were a radical challenge to papal authority in the century, the previous few centuries, all right, since the French Revolution. radical challenge to papal authority, and the First Vatican Council affirmed it very strongly against Gallicanism and Josephism and all those who would challenge the authority of the Pope. But it led to what's called ultramontanism, ultramontanes, across the mountains. These are people who virtually put the Pope in splendid isolation and everybody else simply as his subjects. That built up the Pope so much that there was very little, well, you almost don't need bishops, and we're as it were, delegates of the Pope. So two extremes. One led to the other in reaction. That's the context for First Vatican Council and again for Second Vatican Council. Then a very famous